Good morning, everyone. Sorry, got it started just in the nick of time. Can you all hear me out there okay?
Yes, Chris, I
Yes.
can hear you
Oh,
just
hold
fine.
on.
Yes.
I see you guys. All right, talk now. Sorry, I had my volume down. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Yep.
Ah, awesome, awesome. All right, well, we'll give it like 30 seconds, one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started here. You're done. All right, we will go ahead and get started here. So first off, thank you again for all of you out there who are ready to be the market expert and taking time out of your day just to hop on this and hear about the market. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Bum, bum, bum. We should see that pull up here in a second. Perfect. All right, guys. So we're gonna get started with the same one we usually start with, which is obviously Logan's Housing Wire article that he does weekly. So kind of what we're gonna talk about or what we're gonna see in this one as we get started is uh, ultimately, the housing demand remains surprisingly resilient, is what he's noticing. The pending sales have hit multi-year highs and the active inventory growth is close to turning negative year over year. So, what that kind of means is I would say the demand is still outpacing the supply growth. The lower rates in the mid 2025 created a lasting shift in the market dynamics for sure. And then obviously, inventory growth that was seen earlier in 2025, it couldn't be sustained. Um, so I think some things that won't talk about too that I think is helping is that the mortgage rates are remaining below the 7%, which is kind of where we like to live. Obviously, around the 6.25 is when the market seems to consistently stay active. The improved mortgage spreads, which we really never talk about, but and Logan does mention the mortgage spreads are still supporting the housing activity. And the buyers are still active despite the economic uncertainty and the higher rates that we're seeing. So, again, something we'll discuss, but this is not a booming market. It is a resilient one, though, is what we're seeing. And the inventory does remain tighter than many headlines suggest. So, let's move into this. We're going to jump into weekly pending sales. So what we're seeing with weekly pending sales is it did rise from year over year 79,220 versus the last year's 74,212. We are seeing a slight week to week growth as well during the seasonal peak period, which is kind of the time we're in right now. The demand does remain steady despite the economic and global uncertainty, again, with everything going on with the war. But as you can see, we are higher year over year there, and we are increasing based off of week over week as well. So buyers are still active while the rates are still below kind of the 7% threshold. And the housing demand has remained surprisingly stable, even with, some early snowstorms, the higher rates, and the Iran stuff going on. So, um, I think what we take away from pending sales is that the market activity is still healthier than many expected in 2026. The pending sales today, obviously, that's something down the road. Um, so the future close, pending sales is kind of talking about the future closings in the next 30 to 60 days. But overall, the demand is steady. It's not explosive by any means, but it is resilient. So considering everything that we have seen in this market, everything the market has faced this year, the housing demand is holding up impressively well. So then once we get down to mortgage purchase application data. So purchase apps did decline 3% week over week and a 5% year over year increase though. The weekly activity does remain kind of mixed overall. Again, kind of what we are looking for is 12 to 14 weeks of positive week to week data, and we just don't quite have that yet. With that being said, obviously, the buyer demand is still present even with the rates pressure. And again, this is a forward-looking indicator, 60 to 90 days down the road. But overall, the market has remained positive year over year. If we look over here, we are still above last year as well. So um, now overall, what we're kind of seeing 8 positive weeklies, 8 negative weeklies, 1 flat week, and then 15 positive year over year growth. Um, so again, with this, obviously just kind of keeping this in mind, the demand isn't collapsing, but it is fluctuating. The consistent weekly growth is still kind of missing for it to be, stronger momentum, for what we're kind of looking for to that, says it's a strong market. So we'll watch these closely, and then, it's kind of a good indicator of where the market's heading next. But obviously the market keeps showing demand and it hasn't fully found consistency yet. So now, as we get down to the housing inventory, what we're seeing in housing inventory, um, the growth has continued slowing since 2025, but overall, the current inventory growth is roughly 1.49% year over year. And it's still increasing week to week. Last week was 761,604. This week, we're seeing 767,132. So again, a slight increase there. Um, Overall, I think the lower-ish mortgage rates that we're seeing are helping keep kind of the demand stronger. And then the it's slowing inventory growth though. Last year's rapid inventory gains, they happened when the rates were above 6.64%. So the inventory may briefly turn negative year over year, but it's not like that's unexpected by any means. The inventory today, again, it's still at a multi-year high. And the market is in such a healthier supply position than the extremely tight years of COVID, 2020, 2023. So overall, easier year over year comparisons after June could probably improve the growth here. Um, as far as what to take away from just the single family inventory, again, I don't think it's anything to panic about if the inventory briefly goes negative year over year. Our supply conditions are still healthier now than they were in recent years. So kind of understanding that context matters more than just reacting to the initial headlines, kind of like I mentioned last week, where they can put a headline out for anything, but us as agents, it's on us to understand what's actually happening versus what is just mentioned to catch people's attention. So inventory overall, the inventory growth is slowing, but overall supply is still far healthier than the pandemic years and not something we necessarily need to worry about. So as we move on to new listings, what we're going to see here is new listings did climb back up to 80,803 versus 80,337 last year, but we are back above that important 80K threshold that we like to see during seasonal peak periods. So the market is trying to return to more normal peak seasonal levels, is essentially. Um, Now the seller activity is improving during the peak season, and again, I don't think current levels are anywhere near the housing bubble conditions. So, keep in mind the housing bubble years saw 250 to 440 to 400,000 new listings per week. And so we're not, again, anywhere near that. The post-COVID peak only reached about 91,000 in 2022. So more listings obviously create more opportunity for our buyers and us as agents. The inventory growth today kind of reflects the normalization, not necessarily an oversupply. So we'll watch this closely just to kind of see if the market can sustain the back-to-back 80K plus weeks and kind of see where it goes from there. Now, price cut percentage. So again, just a reminder for price cut percentage, typically we see about 1/3 of all homes go through some sort of price cut. So as far as the national average, now right now what we're seeing is in the national average is 36%, which is less than the year over year 37%, but again slightly higher than that 33.3%. For most of 2026, the price cuts have remained slightly lower than last year if we kind of look at this graph here. Um, but again, roughly right around 1/3 of homes are still seeing those reductions before closing. Um, so ultimately, kind of what we take with this is that the proper pricing strategy still matters. The price reductions are normal. It's not necessarily a sign of panic by any means. So obviously, as we keep alluding to every week, the buyers and sellers both need realistic expectations in today's market. And the easiest way to do that is by getting that Getting that out front, getting the your buyer, your seller understanding what's happening before you start getting into the thick of everything. So again, just having those conversations with their buyers, with their sellers, and moving on from there. So overall, the market doesn't necessarily need another price surge. It just needs some stability, and that's what we're seeing here. So again, I do like this article by Logan. It takes a deep dive into a couple different aspects of the market. So we'll move on now to my next one here. Now, this is housing market inertia grows as 48%, skip moving plans, point finds. So ultimately, what we're kind of seeing, what's happening in this article, is 48% of homeowners didn't even consider moving this past year, which is up from 41% 2 years ago. The mortgage rates kind of matter less now, and it's more about obviously the life circumstances. Because, with the mortgage rates kind of hovering in that 6 to 7 range, really the people that are moving are the ones that have to move because something in life came up. So what we're seeing kind of changing in the overall landscape of things is that the job uncertainty, the family changes, the caregiving, economic stress are definitely becoming bigger barriers. A share of homeowners are blaming mortgage rates. I'm sorry. There is a share of homeowners that are still blaming the mortgage rates. However, that share's dropped down from 45% to 55% 2 years ago. So most homeowners now say they just need the rates below 5% to seriously consider moving, according to this article. So the housing lock-in is no longer just about rates. It's fewer people moving is going to continue to have inventory challenges, and many of the homeowners are choosing to improve their homes rather than to move. So I definitely think there is some sort of renovation trend out there. What this article does mention that nearly half of the would-be movers plan to renovate instead. Again, 65% of homeowners expect to complete projects in the next 18 months. So there's all the sellers or the homeowners out there are still constantly thinking about how they can improve their home versus how they, freely move. Like when a few years back there was a time where people was like, I don't like my view across the street, I want to move. And I don't think we're seeing that nearly as much now. So we are seeing what this article does mention. We are seeing popular upgrades around the kitchens, around the bathrooms, and a big one I think that we're seeing is around ADUs, or additional dwelling units, basically additions to the home. So I do think that's something that we'll continue to see. So conversations should obviously, with our buyers or sellers, we want to focus on life transitions, not just the rates. For the buyers, we want to make sure that they understand, why they have to move, and also so they understand, what's going on with the rates, and because there are still people out there that think, oh, well, 2 or 3%, we're going to see that again, and chances are we probably will. So sellers may need emotional certainty, but not necessarily just financial motivation. Again, I think overall with this article, that like the big point is here that people aren't just locked in by rates anymore. They're locked in by life, and there's more to it than just, what's the rates looking like today, or what's the rates going to do next month. Well, it's more than that, and there's more that goes into these people's thoughts when they're trying to sell. All right, we're going to move on to this next one here. So this is a Inman article on Gary Keller, because Gary Keller did have a uh, podcast interview sort of thing where he was talking about private listings in the MLS. So ultimately, what this is talking about is Gary Keller is warning the world, us, everybody, of private listings and brokerage only marketing, and how that could actually weaken the MLS system. So he does argue that this isn't true privacy. It's actually restricted distribution, because if you think about it, you have, these private listings and stuff, but is that really, like, if you're holding it back from the public, or if you're holding it back from a bunch of places, is that really getting your seller the most eyes on it? Is that getting it out in front of the most possible people that you can? Probably not. So listings are being shared with select groups instead of the full market. That's the private listing, pocket listing thing. Again, less exposure could mean that there's less competition for the sellers. Large brokerages controlling the listing access, something that Gary mentions, is large brokerages that do control the listing access could create information imbalance. And then the MLS risks becoming kind of a market of last resort. Only the listings on the MLS hit there after they fail on the private market. And then he also talks about the bigger concern there, which is that real estate has historically relied on shared information and open competition. So private listing strategies could shift the industry toward controlled visibility, selective access, brokerage controlled inventory. So, I mean, ultimately, while that does sound kind of doom and gloom, what Gary really had to say in it is that the seller's choice does matter. But we need to, us as agents, explain that trade-off to the sellers. Again, it's all about that conversation that we're having with our sellers up front. So there's no questions down the road, essentially. Broad exposure does still create the best chance for maximum competition and the strongest outcomes. And the preparation of strategic marketing can still happen within an open marketplace. So ultimately, us as agents, the way we should probably understand this or we should take this is be prepared to explain the pros and cons of private listings clearly with your sellers. And then understand how the exposure does kind of impact that pricing and competition. And then lastly, the transparency and the client education again matters more now than ever. Having these conversations, discussing with your seller the pros and cons, and just making sure that they really have, all the education and knowledge that they need to move forward. So the question isn't whether the listing is private, but it's who gets access and who controls that access. So I do recommend, if you get a chance, go listen to Gary talk on this. It's a good little video there. But I do want to bring that up just because, again, the headlines that you might see is, oh, it's doom and gloom in KW, but it's really not. The fact of the matter is one of the big things is we are one of the three biggest brokerages that's all private and everything. So we don't really have a lot to worry about there. And then they're always planning for this. So, it's just with the constant change going on through, there's constant mergers and acquisitions and things like that. Like that's on the list of Gary Keller and, KWRI's list of things that they're always thinking about and how can they protect us as KW agents. So yeah, definitely recommend listening kind of to Gary Keller there in that video. Now, as we move on, we're going to move on to jobs data stabilizes, giving Fed hawks more reason not to cut rates. So, what this Housing Wire article is talking, it is done by Logan again here, but it is essentially what's happening is the labor market is stabilizing. It is not weakening. So the job growth improving. It's improving compared to 2025 levels. For instance, April added 115,000 jobs. Um, with unemployment kind of holding at 4.3%. So what Logan is then saying is that ultimately what that means is that the Fed hawks have now don't have they now have more reason to hold the rates higher. The inflation remains the biggest concern, but the stronger labor data does reduce urgency to cut for the Fed cuts. Now, key labor signals that he mentions. Um, is the jobless claims do remain low, the job openings are stabilizing, the construction jobs are not collapsing, and the broader job growth is improving beyond healthcare. So, as far as a housing impact, what he talks about is that the higher for longer rates may continue. The mortgage rates might not fall quickly without weaker labor data. And then the Fed conflict, internal disagreements, those could increase the volatility as well. Um, Ultimately as agents what I would take away from this is don't rely on rapid rate cuts to save the market as we've talked about in the past. The housing market is functioning despite its elevated levels, so we'll kind of just watch the labor and inflation data closely, as they're kind of driving their major driver in this. But ultimately, the labor market isn't breaking, which means the Fed doesn't necessarily have a reason to cut rates, so we'll see where this all goes down the road. So then we'll get into this one. Now, this is buying or selling a home in Denver this year. Here are 5 questions you should ask. And I like to bring this one up just because, you may get these questions. So having these questions kind of in your back pocket to know how to combat them or to know how to answer them, depending on who it's for, is huge. So what this article is kind of talking about, what's happening is the Denver spring market has started earlier than usual this year, which we kind of saw if you've been on this in the last couple weeks. Now, the inventory and demand both rose sharply in February and March, and the market conditions are shifting quickly due to the rates, the affordability, and the economic uncertainty. What that ultimately means is that Denver remains a supply-constrained market because of the lock-in effort. Many homeowners with 3% rates are choosing to stay put, obviously, and unless if life happens. And then the buyers and sellers are still adjusting from the pandemic era expectations. So the major themes that we kind of are seeing that this article mentions we're seeing that's affecting Denver, obviously mortgage rates are still limiting the mobility. The HOA costs and the rules are becoming important in buying decisions. And we discussed that, I believe, last week about HOAs. Insurance costs are rising significantly across Colorado. Some places are definitely harder to insure than others, especially as you get in the mountain areas. And then the buyers are becoming more cautious and educated, and the sellers are still chasing unrealistic COVID pricing in some cases. So, what buyers are essentially learning is that affordable doesn't always mean cheaper monthly payments. With the insurance, the taxes, the HOAs, fees, those definitely matter more than ever. And obviously, we need to understand and know what those are up front when we're taking a buyer into a property because that's going to be a huge piece of if they can afford it or not. Homes are sitting a few weeks but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad homes now. We're just seeing them sit a little longer. So, as far as like kind of a takeaway, well, if we go through this article, what do I need to know about HOAs in Colorado? Will I be able to get insurance in Colorado? Again, it's harder in the mountainous properties where fire danger is definitely more relevant. But yeah, I mean, you're seeing it all over the state. Do I need a real estate agent in 2026? What pandemic effects are still lingering in the Denver housing market? So just some kind of cool or interesting questions to think about, and then also to have your answers ready to go in your back pocket for these. But ultimately, overall, like education and expectation setting are huge. They're critical right now. The local expertise matters more than national headlines because obviously everything's hyper local in real estate that we're seeing. So, what we may see in some of some other states, we're definitely not seeing here. And then agents who understand the financing, the insurance, the HOA, the market psychology, they're going to have a major advantage. And you're already all doing that right now just by hopping on this to hear about it. So again, Denver's market isn't necessarily crashing or booming. It's just adjusting back towards reality, essentially. All right, so we're gonna move to this one now. Douglas, this is hyper local. Douglas County readies residents for fire season. So what this article is essentially talking about is that Colorado could see up to 9,000 wildfires this year. Again, that piece might tie into insurance as well. Douglas County officials are warning of significant fire potential in June and July. And the low snowpack, obviously, since we haven't had any snow or rain other than finally into May. But the low snowpack and drought conditions increase the wildfire risk, obviously. So, we're not going to have that same drainage or water runoff that we would normally have. And Douglas County is already thinking about this. So why it matters, I guess, the fire preparedness is becoming a major homeowner responsibility, and that's huge, especially in the mountain areas. And like when we lived up there, there's a lot of people that don't do any sort of fire mitigation on their property. So maybe there's a route there to get in touch with some of these people and make them aware. Obviously, hopefully they already are aware, but if they aren't, maybe it's a way just for us to get our foot in the door and start talking to them. And like, maybe we can find somebody who does fire mitigation and get them in touch with these people that are interested in it. I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of routes for us to get out there, but the opportunity is definitely there, especially around these wildfire risks. Obviously, the wildfire risks are going to impact the insurance costs. They're going to impact the home values, the buyer decisions, community planning. So Douglas County is still significantly below average moisture levels, obviously, just like everywhere else here in Colorado. The wildfire calls they are rising over time, which in this article it mentions that there's 143 last year versus 85 in 2015. So that's definitely up. Many newer residents may not fully understand evacuation risks as well. So there's a couple different routes you could go about this, but ultimately, like for homeowners, what this mentions is create a defensible space around homes, clear vegetation and limb trees, install ember resistant vent screens, and then learn your evacuation routes and sign up for emergency alerts. And so all four of those things there, I think, you could have some sort of play on these to where maybe you're doing a postcard bomb and you go bomb one of the mountain neighborhoods with postcards to mention those four things and then leave on there like a QR code so that somebody can scan it and get in touch with you so that you can get them in touch with fire mitigation. I mean, there's different routes and different plays on this, but I mean, get creative with it. Be creative with it. Obviously, counties and areas are thinking about this. So now let's make sure the homeowners are also thinking about it as well. Um, Again, in Colorado, wildfire preparedness is no longer optional. I don't think it ever should have been, but we've definitely, as a state as a whole, have not been as tight on that as we should have been. So it's definitely part of a home ownership, definitely something homeowners need to think about for sure. All right, moving on to this one. Now, I believe I don't have access to this article again, but this was Denver Gazette, proposed AI data center in Colorado Springs. Oh, come on. In Colorado Springs, talked on merits amid concerns. So what we're seeing here, and what we see actually, we're seeing a lot of different places, is AI data centers are popping up all over. So this one specifically, what this is talking about is a proposed AI data center called Project Taurus in Colorado Springs. It would be the largest data center in the city. And then what the supporters say is that it could fuel AI growth, could fuel military infrastructure, and also tech/business expansion. Now, why it matters is the AI demand is rapidly increasing. I mean, I talk about it all the time. I'm sure you guys hear about it all the time on any calls you're on, any classes you're on. AI is out there in just about anywhere in the world, or any business out there as well. So, Colorado Springs is positioning itself as a future tech and military hub, obviously with the Air Force Academy down there as well. But data centers are becoming critical infrastructure for Space Force, for AI operations, satellite communications, large scale data processing. Now, on the flip side of that, the community concerns is power usage and rising utility costs, the noise from the cooling systems, because that's something you have to keep in mind is with all this power and energy going through, we also have to keep it cool, which is also another concern for them is the water consumption if you're going to keep it cool with water. And then also the lack of regulations, the control around the future expansion. So, what it kind of means for the housing, for the real estate market, the tech infrastructure can drive long-term population and job growth. Obviously, more buyers moving in and things like that. The growth creates more housing demand over time, and then the infrastructure debates increasingly affect development conversations. So, as far as why I wanted to bring this up, there's a couple of takeaways I think we can get from it. One, AI and tech expansion are becoming part of real estate conversations, regardless of where or what you're talking about. The growth industries impact the housing demand, utilities, affordabilities, and the development as well. And then understanding these local economic drivers gives agents a major edge. So if you do any business down in the Springs, this is definitely something to just, again, keep in your back pocket, keep in mind, maybe get a little more educated on about what's going on, what both sides are fighting for and against. But ultimately, the future of housing isn't just about homes, it's about the infrastructure powering the future economy as well. All right, so that's basically all I got for the articles, but I did want to dive into the local statistics from last week to this week. So last week, new listings, we were at 1835. This week, we're at 1427. So we did see a significant decrease there. Coming soons was 288 last week. This week, we're at 284. So really no change. Back on market was 297 last week. We're at 298. So really no change. The price decrease was 1,885 last week. And the decrease we're seeing here today is 1,873. So slight drop off. I mean, very, very slight. Eight properties. Pending was 1,444 last week. We're seeing it at 1,397 this week. And then the closed 1,061 last week. We're seeing it at 1,047 this week. So both of those last two, pending and closed, were very slight decreases as well. So again, obviously this is all hyper local when we're talking about the market specifically because what we're seeing here, they might not even be seeing the same thing, in all of our surrounding states or even in surrounding cities as well. So ultimately, final takeaway from today, um, here's kind of the big picture of everything we covered. So the housing market is proving to be way more resilient than people expected, like I mentioned at the beginning article. But if we think about everything 2026 is thrown at housing, there's the higher rates, the global conflict, the economic uncertainty, the insurance concerns, the wildfire risk, the affordability pressure, the Fed uncertainty. And yet Pending sales are still positive. Demand is still holding. The inventory is healthier than in recent years. New listings are improving. The price cuts are stabilizing, and the buyers are still out there buying. That matters. So, what kind of market again are we actually in? It's not a crash. It's not a frenzy. It's not a wait until next year market. This is a professionalism market. The agents winning right now are the ones who are understanding the data. They're staying calm in uncertainty. They're educating instead of speculating, and they're solving problems instead of selling hype. So people are staying put not just because of the rates, but because of life. So that obviously means, lower mobility, continued inventory pressure, more renovation conversations, more long-term planning conversations, and the local knowledge is going to matter more than ever. So, get more knowledge on your wildfire prep, get more knowledge on insurance costs, HOA issues, infrastructure growth. I mean, if you really want, if you do, like I said, if you're doing businesses down in the Springs, get more knowledge on the AI and data center expansions. That way you can have these conversations with local consumers, and then those consumers know that you are the local expert right now. You're not just the headline reader. The market is normalizing. It's not collapsing, it's normalizing. So the inventory is healthier, the price growth is calmer, the negotiations are more balanced, and the expectations are resetting. Honestly, that's a healthier market long term. So how we win as agents right now, the opportunity is massive. We win by, again, becoming that local economist, understanding and explaining uncertainty clearly, understanding the financing, the insurance, the affordability when you're dealing with all that stuff, building your trust instead of pressure, and staying consistent while others panic. Again, just being on this weekly is already being consistent. So you trying to be the market expert and listening to everything that's going on, that's only going to help you in the long run as you're getting more educated. Because honestly, consumers right now, they're asking who actually understands what's happening. I mean, we've been hearing so many different pieces on so many different sides. You want to be that person who knows what's happening so you can have these conversations. So ultimately, if I could do one last final line, I would say the market doesn't reward hype anymore. It's going to reward knowledge, consistency, and trust. So keep that in mind. Continue to listen, educate yourself as much as you can. Thank you again for hopping on this call today, and I hope to see you all next week.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy the beautiful 80-degree weather. I mean, you can't beat it.